Welcome to the podcast, Let's Talk PWS, a series all about Prader-Willi syndrome. I'm Susi.
And I'm Katie. Let's start talking.
Welcome, listeners. Welcome to episode 15. Today we are going to talk about the International Prader-Willi Syndrome Organisation, or IPSWO as we call it for short, update and what's happening in the world of PWS. And with us we have a board member from IPSWO, our wonderful Brett Thompson. Hi, Brett.
Hi, Susie.
Katie, can you give us a little bit of a rundown on Brett's extensive experience in the Prader-Willi world?
Yes, so Brett is CEO of Interaction Disability Services, and we're just so grateful to have him on our board. He just brings a wealth of knowledge of, the services that are available to us in Australia. But he also serves IPSWO, the International Prader-Willi Syndrome Organisation, and he has very early morning meetings, and we're very grateful again for the help that he's giving, and also the information and the wisdom that he's gleaning from all around the world. So thank you, Brett.
Thanks,
All
Katie.
right. Well, let's kick off then. What are some of the key things that IPSWO is working on at the moment?
Yeah, good question. So IPSWO, there's a lot going on internationally at the moment. So the prime focus for IPSWO is basically sharing information, knowledge, and practice around the world to try and get a level of equity around how we can provide support to people living with Prader-Willi. That includes things like rates of PWS, treatments, diagnoses, support practices, lifelong outcomes, ambitions, the full gamut of things. So very big remit for IPSWO, the key focus, and then they get into detail around how we can support people living with Prader-Willi directly. There's a research, fairly strong research arm, so looking at, again, a whole lot of issues around diagnosis, treatments, preventative measures, supporting practice in the community and people living at home. There are forums for professional caregivers. So what's practice around the world and how is that working and how can that be replicated? So there's a lot of different area, and obviously there's a lot of research material. There's a lot of educational material on their website. They have lots of web chats, webcasts, and a wealth of information that anyone can access via the IPSWO website. On any given time of day or week. And yes, some of their meetings are held early in the morning. They're not expecting people to sign up for those, but the information is available whenever you need to access it. It's a great organisation to be involved in and some fantastic things happening.
Well, when you say fantastic, and I'd really like to hear more about each of those topics that you just covered, but I think everyone, what's burning on everyone's mind is probably if we can just start with clinical trials, is there hope? Is there cures coming?
Yeah. So the clinical trials one's an interesting one. So the two key trials at the that are sort of in vogue are the Soleno therapeutics with Vykat. So Vykat's a appetite suppressant, which is in place in the US at the moment. There was a trial underway in the UK. They've recently Soleno have recently pulled out of that trial in the UK. There's an IPSWO statement paper on this, but basically what the crux of it is, there was a view that the UK probably wouldn't endorse Vykat for use in the UK. So there are some people that were going through the trial process and that's been stopped. So there's questions around that. The feedback from the US varies. Some people find the use of the Vykat medication extremely helpful. Others, it's having no impact at all. So again, that's variable. And then there's also the product, again, appetite suppressant from Aardvark, and that's a US-based company as well, and they've just had to change their clinical trial model because of some issues that have arisen. Not that it's stopped, they're just doing it in a different way. So those two drug companies, their prime focus is looking at how can they support the process of the hyperphagia and minimise the risk of or the requirement or the urge for people with Prader-Willi to be continually food seeking. So that's their focus. Look, it's early days. The outcome will be what it will be. To be honest, I don't know. Is there a magic bullet? No. but they're certainly striving pretty hard to get that bit right. And I think that's one of the key areas of focus at the moment in terms of the research arm. And then there are lots of other sort of different research projects carrying around the world looking at different aspects of Prader-Willi. So there's one that's coming out of Australia at the moment, which people would know, Georgina Loughnan. So there was a project coming out of Prince Alfred, which is looking at the impact of antibiotics on people with Prader-Willi syndrome and how they react to, not antibiotics, anesthesia. So post-surgery, yeah. So they're looking at recruiting people to be involved in a project looking at what the impact of anesthesia is on people with Prader-Willi, because we're not really sure. And what that will do is then have a change potentially in how surgeons and anaesthetists undertake their practice for people when they know they've got Prader-Willi syndrome. So that's just a practical one, but it's a really important one and a good one. It's an area that you think it's a little off to the side, but it's extremely important. And then there's research going on. There was a group of PhD students studying out of the Netherlands just recently, looking at the impact of the social environment on people with Prader-Willi syndrome. So there was a study from West Africa, Mexico, and India, and just looking at the differences in terms of how those cultures support or work with people with Prader-Willi syndrome, and vastly different, but the issues are the same. So it's around families not necessarily feeling connected or supported, not knowing where to go for information, how do we manage the food-seeking behaviours, all of the things that go with that. But then the Indian study, for example, some of the feedback from there was they were of the view that culturally, because one of the young ladies in that study was large, that was seen as a positive thing, as a sign of religious sign that it was a good thing to have, and it was a sign that they'd been touched as a family in a positive way. So it just varies, but the issues are the same. It's the same. It's the same. I think one of the things that we're finding with the research and one of the key drivers behind it is just how do we get a level of consistency around the world, because every country does it differently and manages people with Prader-Willi differently, where access to growth hormone varies, genetic testing levels are different depending on where you live, which it shouldn't be that way, but it is. The list goes on. So it's a vast topic and lots of people doing a lot of work to try and work out how we can make the lives of people living with Prader-Willi better than what they might otherwise be. And we know people with Prader-Willi they're living longer now, living far more fulfilling lives than they might have years ago. So now we're starting to see other things, other health conditions arise that we mightn't have seen 30, 40, 50 years ago because they didn't live that long. Yeah. So there's a whole change. It's a whole shift.
It's great. I think that COVID probably pushed everybody online, and so now we've got a bit more equity as far as access to knowledge at least. And then people can advocate wherever they live on the planet for the types of services that can support their human rights, to live and to have great lives and quality of life.
Yeah, well, we actually know now. I think we now know more than we've ever known, as you said, because COVID forced us to connect globally in a virtual manner like we are now, and it works. We've had to do it, and it just works. It breaks down the barriers of travel and distance.
Yeah, because when Chelsea was born, there was not really much of an internet, and to go see a world-leading scientist, we'd have to fly, 20 hours. And now if she was born this morning, I can have a meeting this afternoon with all the world-leading scientists because of the internet and because they're all online. Yeah.
Yep. And I think the other thing that's really important and what I find really interesting and exciting about the whole IPSO, the networking process with it, is that the people involved in IPSO, either directly or off to the side and connected with it, are extremely passionate, but they're so willing to share their experience and what they know, because as knowledge is power. So the more knowledge you've got, if you hang on to it, you become a powerful person. But they actually want to share it, and disseminating the information and giving it to those who need it actually is exactly what should be happening, which is what IPSO is about. So it's that sharing that's just so important.
I think that's because it's such a difficult syndrome, to handle and to manage, and it's so foreign to what you're used to in your life previously. So it's something that you're willing. It's a bit of a force. I've had to handle this. I really don't want anyone else to go through it. So let's just pour it out.
Yeah. Yep. And any experience you've got, any roadblocks that you've had that you can share with someone else, because they're going to come across the same ones potentially. This is how I got around it. It's invaluable because it just saves them the heartache of having to go through something that you had to go through. And if one person can benefit from that knowledge, then it's worth sharing it. Absolutely
exactly. And you're pretty much protecting a life when you do that. So there's a real fire to do that.
Prader-Willi syndrome, it's spectrum, and it's for those living with Prader-Willi syndrome who've got the capacity to communicate what they're going through and what they're feeling and so forth, which is fantastic. I wish Steph could. Sadly, she couldn't. She can't. But people living with Prader-Willi syndrome, we have ALA here. Is that now going to be replicated overseas and in IPSWO as well across borders?
Yeah, there are different approaches to it, Susie. So Germany through Norbert and Hubert have had a group with people living with Prader-Willi for quite some time, and their approach is a little bit different to how they manage that. It's not quite the same as ALA, but similar sort of format. New Zealand has a group that's similar. There's a group running out of Colombia. I know that we've got connections with Malaysia, and Ireland. So and there's a connection, there's a group in from the US. So there's a subcommittee, if you like, of IPSWO called People Living with Prader-Willi Syndrome. And one of the things we're looking at or exploring is how can we support people living with Prader-Willi Syndrome to advocate more on their own behalf, support it appropriately, but then get them to the point where, as some of the ALA members do, present at the Prader-Willi Syndrome Australia board meetings or at the Asia Pacific Conference, and ultimately whether we can support people to actually present at the IPSO conference. We're sort of edging towards, can we facilitate that to happen, and how will we make that work? What supports would they need, and how can we facilitate that process? So that would be the conference 2028 in Brazil. But also ultimately there's a vision ultimately that with the right supports and, depending on the individual's capacity and capability, whether you could ultimately have people with Prader-Willi on a board, like whether you have someone with Prader-Willi on the IPSO board, for example, which would be the ultimate end goal that you'd be working towards. But it's a work in progress to get to that point, and there are lots of steps along the way. But that group's really looking at how can we explore and understand from our people living with Prader-Willi what their needs are, what they're experiencing, what their heartaches are, what works for them and what doesn't, not just here in Australia with ALA, but more globally. And there's some fantastic things happening around the world, but just sharing what people are doing and how it works the momentum's building. It's an exciting time to be involved, to be honest. It's good. It's a really good time to be here.
It's awesome to see them on the PWS Australia board, because it helps to ground us and it helps direct our decision making. And it's not just about us and what we think; it's about what's true for them. So that's been brilliant.
It's great to see it evolving and just the progress. Although seemingly it could be perceived as slow, but there's definitely a lot of traction and a lot of advancements being made. Just circling back to the clinical trials. Can you talk a little bit about the research committee? How do people get onto that? What's involved? I mean, I just want the cure, but I don't really understand all the steps to get there. So it'd be good to tell our listeners, just a little bit more about how these clinical trials work and some of the restrictions and red tape and.
I'm not a research expert, so the clinical trials are very complicated. They're very complex. So if it's a drug clinical trial, for example, and don't quote me verbatim on this, even though I'm saying it out loud, very strict protocols they need to go through in terms of what the study protocol will be, who's going to be involved, what the drugs are, whether people are going to know they're on the drug if it's a drug, or whether they're getting a placebo, which is the sugar tablet or whatever it might be that's not the real drug, to manage the differences. Then they'll go through a process of who are our subjects, so who are the people involved in the study. And normally the process for that is they'll do a call or an expression of interest for people, so that you will often find through various means there'll be a bulletin or a notification coming out saying we are looking for people who, in this case, have Prader-Willi syndrome between these age groups, who might be willing to be involved in a clinical trial. They may or may not give you a lot of detail about what the trial will be, and then they'll go through a rigorous process usually of making sure that there's medical checks and the appropriate balances around what supports the person will have throughout the trial period, the sign off from family or the appropriate guardians around, yep, we consent to the person being involved. You've got to get the ethics approval. So it's rigorous from a family point of view, or from someone who's sort of watching the podcast and wanting to know what do I do. The main thing would be look out for the expressions of interest, and they'll be certainly showing up on PWSA on our website, and certainly through IPSWO where appropriate. Sometimes you'll find them through clinics, so the clinics may have the information, and then it's basically a matter of submitting your interest in being involved and then following up. They will follow up with you. Oftentimes they struggle to get people to be involved, but that's the process. So if you see something come through that's of interest to you, by all means, reach out to them and see whether you're going to be involved or not. That's normally the way to do it. The IPSWO research, clinical research trial, that's usually through the board process, and most of the people that are on that are researchers and clinical people from that IPSWO sort of have linked in with and have connected to. But if there are people that are interested, I'll be more than happy if they come back through PWSA or some other network, and I'm happy to put names forward for that process. To be honest with you, that's relatively new to me, that committee. And if that's an approach we can take, I'm happy to support and facilitate that if I can. And that's part of my role, to advocate. But if that's not the process, then I can certainly find out and get back to people in terms of how you can get involved. But I think the main way would be EOI, put your name forward. If you're interested, put your name out there.
It actually surprised me when you say clinical trials are struggling to get participants to be involved in the trial. That's not the first time I've heard that. And look, each to their own. They do them, how they live their life, how they want to live life. But I, for one, I'm always putting my hand up for clinical trials. Some of the challenges I've got now with Stephanie to get her to clinical trials is behaviours.
Yeah.
So, I feel like sometimes we're damned if we do and damned if we don't. Very tricky.
Yeah. Yep. And one of the other ones, I think there was one recently that there was a challenge because that they wanted the same person to, it was a medication administration sort of trial, and they needed the same person administering the medication on at the same time every day.
Yeah.
And if you're living in a still home, for example, you've got a rotating roster of staff. That's not going to happen. So how do you facilitate that? Because they don't want Brett doing it today and Katie doing it tomorrow and Susie doing it on Friday.
Yes.
They want Brett doing it every day.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge. But and how do we get around that? Because there must be a way.
Well, absolutely. They're barriers that need to be broken down because they can be overcome. That is just a practicality, or that is, potentially I look at that as an inhibitor of some, a trial that can possibly, someone can participate in.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely agreed. Yeah.
And I think it's really important. Chelsea's grown up knowing that she has information to give doctors that no one else has. She has the purest form of information. And if she, a part of her purpose on the earth is to advance the medicine and to train everybody around her in Prader-Willi syndrome, to upskill everybody that she knows. But some of that is to advance the actual medicine so that we can find the cure. And so our role as parents has been to get her in mint condition, in ship shape, so that she can do the trials and participate in as much as she can. So it's a real deep sense of purpose for Chelsea to actually take where we are now and move it forward, so that we can get towards the cure. Because how amazing would that be? It's such a huge accomplishment as a human race that we can fix these things.
Oh, it'll be massive. Absolutely. Yeah. And it's a great approach.
In the meantime, we'll keep pushing and trying and not giving up hope, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you, Brett, for your time again today. We really appreciate you. We appreciate all of the wonderful work that you do here in Australia and abroad. And, we'll see you soon.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Brett.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
As we close tonight, don't forget to sign up as members at pws.org.au, where you'll also find ways to donate and sponsor our various projects and initiatives. Please remember to like, follow and share us on our socials. And until next week, let's keep talking.